The Jets are down to their last preseason game tomorrow, and the Jets roster for this upcoming season appears to be just about set in stone. Who's made the cut, and what will this team do? Find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, there is a decent bit to talk about. Winnipeg is getting ready to play its final preseason game. We have some injury updates here and there, mostly just with Jonathan Toews, and the team is trying to figure out who's going to start for them this coming season. So a lot of fun stuff there. Maybe some things that are not as fun when it comes to some of the particular line combinations that we're seeing, just because the Jets right now are stretched a little bit thin, and we're going to have to see Winnipeg really have a next man up mentality and improvise in some pretty interesting ways. Before we dive into what these lines are looking like and what to expect tomorrow, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com, and you could win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, like I said, the Jets are walking into tomorrow with a bit of a helter-skelter lineup, and this lineup is probably the closest that we're going to get to the opening night roster, barring one or two changes. But up front, you've got Connor Scheifele-Velarde, Nyquist, Nemesnikov, Perfetti, Niederreiter, Barron, Iafallo, and Koepka, Ford, Pearson. The extras for an additional line include Gustafsson, Lambert, Chibrikov, and Dewar. And then on defense, you've got Morrissey, DeMello, Stanley, Pionk, Fleury, Schenn, and your press box pairing is Heinola, Miller. Now, I will say right off the bat, you're going to notice that I mentioned last episode, I really didn't want to see some of these same deep pairings that we saw in the last game. And technically, we are seeing a new one just because Morrissey's back in, and as is DeMello. But this defense is going to be vulnerable. And I think we all knew that, right? Coming into this 6 to 8 weeks without Dylan Samberg, this group is really going to be tested. And what I sort of struggle with when it comes to Winnipeg is it often feels like they don't identify where their weak links are, right? What are they struggling with the most? And I think puck moving ability, especially on the back end, hasn't always been an issue when Samberg and Morrissey are all healthy. But now that you're missing at least one of your two pillars on the blue line, you're going to have to really figure out if, Stanley, Fleury, and Schenn can carry this load. Pionk, when left to his own devices, isn't the same without Samberg. Samberg and Pionk really play off of each other very nicely, and I think that complementary skill set makes it a little alarming to see Stanley and Pionk paired together because those guys just don't work well, not as a duo. I think if you have Stanley on your third pairing with somebody who can move the puck efficiently on the right side, maybe like a Miller, you'd actually have a fairly okay third pairing. But Stanley Pionk as your second pairing, I think, is asking a lot of Logan, and I think Pionk is not the kind of guy who's going to be a stabilizing partner for either side, right? Even for himself. So this is going to be very interesting, is how I would put it. Fleury Schenn as your third pairing, it is what it is. You know my thoughts on some of Fleury's decision-making and sort of where his skill sets may or may not align with what Schenn does. I think the one positive thing is that Fleury does skate with the puck well, so hopefully, he can keep getting the puck up the ice a little bit faster and trying to create transition. But yeah, I think these two deep pairings are going to have some tough shifts here and there, probably frequently. I think with how the Jets forwards are also arranged, there's going to be a lot of stress put on this defensive zone work. So, could be an interesting start to the season. Obviously, Samberg was going to be one of the few guys that you just really couldn't afford a long-term injury to. So once he's back, things will improve significantly. But how the Jets get there for the next few weeks, however long it takes, could be a really big question mark. Hanel and Miller, I really don't know why both of these guys are benched. At least get Miller in, right? Miller is not only a very solid third pairing dude, but he also helps you on the second power play unit. So is what it is. I'm not going to waste a lot more breath on that. You know what I think about how the Jets handle their deep pairings up front. This team I think is going to be very solid at forechecking and defensively relatively stingy, but this team just doesn't have a lot of high-end offense. You've got CSV, which is an okay first line, but again, you've heard me talk about why they're more middle of the pack when it comes to other top lines. Still good, just not elite. And even though they individually might have really high-end skill sets, when they're all three together, it just doesn't always translate in the way that I think they expect it to. Nyquist, Nemesnikov, and Perfetti will hold down the fort if Taves is not ready. In terms of that line, I mean, yeah, Nemesnikov, not exactly, an elite attacking-minded 2C, but he'll do some really solid defensive work, and he's always one of those greasy goal kind of guys. He'll drive towards the net, he'll try to crash the crease, all that stuff, block shots, and, he's also a tough customer, right? He'll be a bit of a set of fists if somebody comes at Perfetti again, so, I think NNP can work. Again, I think Taves will probably be back sometime in the near future. I don't anticipate his injury being particularly long-term, but in terms of, when that day-to-day sort of subsides, in the meantime, you're just going to have to live with a line that's probably defensively oriented. The third line, Kepka, Niederreiter, Barron, and Iafallo, similar to the second line, more defensively oriented. Barron will have to see what he does, right? Morgan shows flashes sometimes of being better than a fourth liner, but then there are moments where you see him and you're not really as sold on it. So, yeah, I don't know that I'm necessarily expecting this trio to be elite, but I think in terms of the forechecking and maybe grinding out some goals, I could see this combination working, right? And maybe it even gives you some options should Lowry miss even more time than anticipated. The fourth line, Kepka, Ford, and Pearson should be fine-ish. Again, Pearson, I just haven't really been sold on. His hands and brain are awesome, and he shows a lot of veteran savvy and can really pull off some great passes when he has open space, but his feet are definitely a real issue. The skating ability of his that he used to have as a King and even as a Canuck, they've really dovetailed the past couple of seasons or tailed off significantly. And so I just don't really know what we're going to see with this, right? I feel like if this is kind of the dawning horizon really of the final season of his career or two, I like him. I think he brings a lot of experience. And I think as a mentor, he's great. But I don't know about asking him to, have significant 5v5 time and also PK. Those two traits, I think, are going to get the fourth line in more trouble. But, it is what it is. The Jets have their own idiosyncrasies. They have things that they do and don't like to do. Pearson and Scheifele are close from what I understand. So, yeah, I'm sure Scheifele wants his best friend to play, and that's not really shocking. So, I hope the power of friendship is enough to carry this team because, the season's about to start in a couple of weeks. And if you're asking this whole team to try and hold the fort down, that's going to be very tricky. And I want to chat about how, where this pressure is going to lie, who's really going to have to stand up, and which players we really need to see top-end seasons from in order to survive the next month and a half or so. We'll dive into all of that coming right up. But before we do, wanted to draw us back to our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if that wins. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. If you think you know who's going to prevail between the Lamar Jackson-less Ravens or, say, the Texans, who have had their own offensive issues this year, this is your chance to get in. Spoiler alert, I would probably put down some cash on the Texans, but if you think that maybe the Ravens have something left in the tank, this is your chance to potentially win big. Or maybe you think Mahomes' magic is continuing and he is going to have another big weekend after a big rebound performance against Baltimore. This is a chance to do so. New users, again, just $5, and you could get $300 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started winning right now. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are continuing to chat about where the Jets are and sort of what to expect from the start of the season. Winnipeg is going to be playing very shorthanded for the next couple of weeks. Lowry was already a very big loss, and I think in some ways this fan base maybe underestimates his impact. I used to be guilty of the same thing. For a while, I really wasn't sold on Lowry as a consistent 2C sort of option. But the past year or two under Bones and Arneal has kind of revealed that he's back in better than ever. So it's really unfortunate that, this hip injury has significantly sidelined him. And, hopefully with this rehab process, he's feeling better. He's feeling stronger. Obviously, he's been skating a bit and should be starting to get into contact scrimmages sometime in the near future. But again, that might not be until November where he makes a lineup return. And so the Jets are already down one of their best two-way centers. Taves is day-to-day with something. He tweaked it during, a preseason game against Minnesota. And while it might not be an issue by the start of the season, I think the fact that you're already seeing him hurt before he's even really taken serious game time sort of, suggests how perilous this 2C role is. Winnipeg doesn't have loads of elite depth here. They've got plenty of centers, but how many of them can actually keep pace with some of the league's best players? That's a tougher conversation. And they're not going to face that every night to start the year. But your first game is against Dallas. And Dallas is the team that last year, with a stronger lineup, had you beat in the playoffs. How will you adjust and adapt to that heading into the start of the season, right? This is going to be a different year. I don't really expect us to have a 15-1 start. That was a miraculous run. One of the most fun things I've ever seen the Jets do. And, repeating a President's Trophy, all this stuff is probably not the objective this season. Now you have to figure out how to survive and make it to the playoffs and have a deep run. And I'm looking at this team, and I just struggle to see how they pull this off, especially at the start. It actually looks to me like the kind of team where I wonder if Chevy really gets aggressive to start the season. I mentioned this on a previous episode, but Winnipeg really just needs help, right? There's no way around it. Even with a fully healthy lineup, this team still has some very clear offensive gaps. There are some defensive issues in terms of the puck moving ability and speed of skating in transition. And so the Jets need to find help somewhere. One guy I do see kind of popping up in rumors is Christian Reichel. And Reichel, is a young 23-year-old winger and center who maybe hasn't had the best run with the Hawks, but it seems like they're already kind of giving up on him. And in my mind, look, he's not the best bet that you could possibly make, but they're asking for a mid to late round pick. If you're the Jets and you know that you already have trouble attracting free agent talent and maybe some big trades with guys who are on, no trade or no movement clauses, maybe this is the sort of stuff you should be in on. I talked about Capo Caco kind of being a more expensive but similar scenario last year. The Jets weren't really in on that. Caco went to Seattle, had a really good season, unfortunately got hurt to start this year. But a Reichel might really be able to help this Jets team out because you look at the offensive potential and it's not looking good. Even with Taves over Nemesnikov and Nemesnikov back into, the bottom six, there's just not a lot of high-end elite skill. You've got some guys who are excellent forecheckers. I think this team will be very stingy and frustrating to play against. And in terms of the piss and vinegar kind of hockey, I think the Jets are going to have that down to a T. But, the league is moving away from this, generally speaking. The skill barrier is very high, and the Jets aren't really calling on a lot of their young players. So if you're really serious about contending and making the playoffs and having a deep run, I don't think that this lineup is just good enough. It's really not. It'll get to the playoffs probably. I'm a little cooled off on just how easy it'll be because the start of the season could be kind of rough. And, the Jets just need scoring help. Like, there's just no getting around it. They need skill, they need help, and they might need to take a gamble or two. This feels like a really good season where maybe you look for a reclamation project or two. If you don't trust the youth just yet in your own pool, look elsewhere. Find some players who are disgruntled with their current situations who might be willing to give the Jets a real shot. I think coming to Winnipeg isn't as unsexy as it used to be. Is it the hottest prospect? Absolutely not. And I fully acknowledge that. I think Chevy does work with some unique circumstances that not a lot of other GMs do. But there are also a lot of players who don't necessarily control their destiny and have limited ability to go anywhere else. So if you're not already wanted by your current team, why not give the Jets a shot? We've seen a lot of players come here who want to resign, who want to extend, and who are happy to be in Winnipeg. We even know that Connor, for whatever debates there continue to be over his contract situation, seems to be pretty dedicated to sticking around with Winnipeg. So in terms of retaining talent, that hasn't been as much of an issue. It's just getting guys here that maybe is a bit of a challenge. Assuming that Winnipeg kind of keeps what they've got, though, you're going to have to really hope that Hellebuck is his Vezina form. Now, I don't really worry about Helly at all, right? That's just not a player that I've ever felt is likely to slide anytime in the near future. But goalies are volatile. We know that they can be sometimes cyclical, and Helly has had several years of just nothing but Vezina caliber play. If he doesn't start this year off playing like he did last year, that could make things really interesting. And by interesting, I mean a little chaotic. This Jets defense is not going to have a lot of puck moving ability. They are going to struggle to exit the D zone cleanly, and Helly's going to have to do a lot more work. Last year, he had one of the least or lowest volume shot totals, I believe, of his whole career so far. Winnipeg as a whole was just defensively so stingy, and it's why I was really hammering home the idea that, that team, if he added some talent at the trade deadline, could really hit a different level. But they sort of missed the assignment. Now we're left with a team that looks not really on the same level, despite having many of the same names, and the Jets are going to have to sort of make do. So this really feels like a moment where you're going to have all hands on deck. And I think the one positive way to spin this is, regardless of whether the Jets do well or poorly to start the year, obviously it is just for a few weeks. And if things don't necessarily improve, I've said this before, but I'm not going to be upset if the Jets maybe have to sell. Now, that's going to be the last thing on their docket. They are going to hold on to as many of these guys as they possibly can until they absolutely cannot make the playoffs, right? They're going to be very diamond hands about trying to let players go. But you notice they signed a lot of these dudes on one-year deals. Pearson, Koepka, Nyquist, they're not here long-term. So the Jets have given themselves flexibility if things really start to go a little bit awry. I don't know that they'll reach that point, but if they do, they could potentially get a big talent in the draft. So either way, I'm not really upset. I think this year I'm not really expecting a lot. Last year, you already had a President's Trophy. You're starting the year off with a banner. I'm not really upset if things don't work out so well. What I do hope is that they don't try and force things that don't make sense and that don't necessarily help their window really stay open. If you force a move, make sure that you're bringing in a player who's around for the longer term and isn't likely to just decline in the next 2 seasons and then falls off the face of the earth. You're tied with a lot of money on the books and you don't have the same flexibility you did before. I think where the Jets are now is not as bad of a position as you might think. I think that there's a good foundation here to build on. And, if the Jets maybe struggle this season, that's okay. The Gavin McKenna race is pretty big. Winnipeg's not going to be in the lottery tier, but, they might be sniffing around maybe the middle of the pack. And again, I don't think that's the worst if they end up with a higher draft pick. So I think there's a lot of ways to win this season. I don't know that I have a specific door that I'm banging on, but yeah, all I can say is for the next few weeks, the Jets are really going to have to stand tall and show us what kind of team they are. Last year, I think we saw a lot of the perseverance, hard work, and dedication that the team showed. This time, they're going to have to put it on an even bigger level to survive this early stretch where they're going to be facing more adversity to start the season than usual. So wishing the boys the best of luck. Going to be an interesting one. Speaking of interesting conversations about the Jets lineup, one guy that I don't really understand, Winnipeg's lack of interest in is Dave Gustafsson, and I want to chat about why coming right up. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee. Thanks again for rejoining us on tonight's show as we're just chatting about the Jets' next few weeks, the upcoming season, and, the fact that the Jets, frankly, are they're maybe dealing with some injury issues. We know that they have some talent issues. And one of the things that I don't really understand is why Winnipeg hasn't figured out what David Gustafsson really is. They keep playing him around the Jets lineup. They have deployed him as a winger recently. They're not really using him as a center. And I feel like the Jets have already sort of written him into this idea of like a fourth-line forechecker rather than what he's been when he was elsewhere. With the Moose, he's generally been pretty offensively productive. And there was even a stretch where he was playing with Perfetti on the top line. And guess what? That duo was really good. So why have the Jets never tried him with Perfetti again? Why has Winnipeg not really looked at him as a middle six center who might have legitimate upside? I think for a 25-year-old center of his size, mobility, and skill, I think he does a lot of the things right that I would look for in maybe a player who's got more to offer you than what the Jets have allowed him to be. And, now that he's on the outside looking in versus Pearson and Ford, I don't get it. I feel like Gus is a bit of a sleeper for the Jets, and they just don't really seem to want to give him a chance to thrive. What I find particularly odd about all of this is that, they don't really want to waive him usually, but they don't also play him very much. And so, if you're Gus, right, you've had some pretty productive AHL seasons. You've also had some decent stretches with, the Jets' fourth line, but I feel like there's a better player there than what Winnipeg has allowed him to be. I think he's more than just a forechecker. He's got pretty strong hands. He's well-balanced. He does a ton of the defensive work, and he's also a force in transition. Why not see if he can be your Lowry replacement while Adam is out? Now, obviously, you're not asking him to leapfrog Taves in the order because that's just not happening, right? Never. But if you're looking for somebody who might have a little more jump in the tank, a little more juice, maybe something that can help you with your two-way game, but also provide enough skill to not be a complete deadweight offensively, Gus might be a guy who can offer that. I know that his NHL record looks relatively modest, and I can't sit here and say that, 6 or 7 points in the last couple of seasons per year is something to really get excited about. But we also haven't really seen him play with a lot of high-end skill. We haven't seen him get a chance to really thrive alongside top young players on this team. So why not see what happens, right? He was a fairly highly touted prospect when he was in Sweden. He's only 25. You don't have a lot of centers with a lot of high-end skill. Why not find out if he can be a guy who, for the next couple weeks, is capable of adding an extra layer to your game? He's already had pretty good years with the Moose. You know what he is down there. He's not going to do you much good playing on the fourth line consistently. See if he has an extra layer of skill to him and, ability to maybe help you when you're down some of your top centers. You're already down Lowry. You might have some times where you're going to be missing Taves. Give it a shot. We know Nemesnikov is a really good bottom six guy who's being overused as your 2C. Taves might have some health issues as he starts to ramp back up. Find out if somebody else on this team can carry the burden. And to see Gustafsson not even be able to have precedence over maybe a Pearson or something, I don't fully understand it. He does a lot of the things that I thought coaches love. He's a strong forechecker. He's a force along the walls. He's a relentless engine. So I don't see why he hasn't won over the coaching staff. And it feels like in the next couple of days, he's going to get waived. Somebody might claim him and realize that there's more to his game than meets the eye. If there's a team that I'm actually very worried that he goes to, it's Minnesota. I think the Wild can, take advantage of a player like him. I think he fits a lot of their sort of archetypes. And we already know that Chisholm got claimed earlier. He's become a solid second or third pairing option for them. I hope that Gus doesn't end up there and ends up really thriving. Not that I'm rooting against him, but it's just like I would prefer not to see a division rival take advantage of a Jets decision that goes against us. And look, I like Pearson a lot. I think he was a great player, and I think he's got a ton of winning experience. But, I look at what Winnipeg is doing with some of its youth and prospects, and if you aren't really willing to actually use these guys and see if they can't be more for you, then again, we have this conversation every year. What's the point of doing this? Why draft them? Why keep them hanging around if you don't really intend to get the most out of them? And I'm not going to sit here and say that a player like Gustafsson is going to drop 40 or 50 points out of nowhere. Never arguing that. But Winnipeg hasn't really allowed itself to find out what some of these dudes can do. And sure, you can say, well, we're talking about a President's Trophy team last year. They're a cup contender and yada, yada. I hear all that. The President's Trophy is awesome. We know that doesn't mean anything for the playoffs. That's not translated to how the Jets' postseason success has worked. We know that Winnipeg in the playoffs, barring last year, really hasn't done much of anything. In fact, they usually go into the postseason and they get embarrassed. Last year was like the first time in many years that we saw the Jets go on a deeper run. They won a round. It was a little fortunate because it required a last-second save in, the Blues series, but I still think that they played much better hockey, comparatively speaking. They still need to find a way to raise their playoff ceiling, though. As it is, they're capped to like a first-roundish team right now, and, if you have all these guys who have been putting up good numbers elsewhere and have generally been successful at other levels and even show up to preseason and camp like they've got, something to prove, give them a chance with some real skill. See if they can thrive off of what made them successful at lower levels. Why not see if Perfetti and, Gus have some real chemistry? Other teams have done this to some success. Winnipeg has a couple of very key duos. Maybe a Gus Perfetti duo could be a really menacing forechecking unit with enough offensive skill to be a really potent middle six threat. Why not give it a shot? See what happens. The Jets already kind of know what they have as it is, but they always seem so afraid to find out if they have something else. And it's not like I don't understand that. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to risk becoming worse off. But realistically, how much worse can you possibly be? We already have a number of key injuries. The team has to get creative. This might be the time to throw guys out there and see what really sticks, and make smart decisions, right? Don't just throw players into weird situations or positions or roles that don't make any sense. Pair them efficiently, pair them smartly, look at their past track records. You might find something there that can help you get some real NHL ability out of these guys. But it is what it is. I've always felt like the Jets have kind of struggled with this particular part of the development cycle. I really hope that over the next couple of years that changes. And if this is the season that starts it, awesome. But I know where the Jets are. I know what they historically do. I know they have their own interests and concerns about the success of the team. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see and hope for the best. But curious to know how you feel about Gus. Do you feel like he's been given the opportunity that he deserves, or do you feel like he hasn't really been utilized to his max potential? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. That'll be all the time that we have for tonight's episode. Tomorrow night, we'll recap the very last preseason game against Calgary, and hopefully the Jets can show us something special on a night where, maybe there's some uncertainty about what this Jets lineup looks like starting next week. But like I said, that's all the time that we have for tonight. Thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.